Hello learners, I welcome you back to this course of Environmental Economics, and today we will be starting a concept of Pareto Optimality. This concept is very close to microeconomics, wherein it is discussed that how the social welfare can be achieved by efficient allocation of goods. In today's lecture, we'll try to integrate this concept of Pareto optimality to understand the trade-offs which we face under environmental economics. So let us have a look at the learning objectives of this particular lecture. We will be first of all defining the concept of Pareto optimality. Thereafter, we will understand that what do we mean by efficiency in consumption, and then how do we maximize the social welfare. As we have already seen in the lectures on sustainability, we have understood that sustainability is not only about environmental protection. Sustainability lies on the three pillars of social, economic, and of course environment. Also, we have understood through environmental Kuznets curve that environmental and economic growth often involves conflicts and trade-offs. That is, sometimes we have to make a choice whether we want more of environmental goods or we want more of market goods which are calculated under economic growth. So, the choice which has to be made between market good and environmental goods creates a problem of allocation of resources. Pareto optimality is hence a core concept which we use to analyze this allocation of resources. This concept talks about that how the goods can be allocated with an efficient multi-objective, and then how do we analyze the trade-offs between human and the environmental objectives. That is, that how with the given resources we can produce the goods by analyzing these trade-offs, how between the choice of the consumption of the various consumers in the economy, what should be produced and how it can be redistributed so that the social welfare is maximized. When we talk about Pareto optimality, this concept was defined in 1906 by Vilfredo Pareto. This concept of Pareto optimality is also known as Pareto efficiency. And what does it say? It says that in economics, it describes a particular situation where the resources are allocated in the most efficient way possible. It is of course taking into consideration that there are limited resources and unlimited wants. Also, the choice has to be made between the efficient allocation of resources and the trade-offs which we face, particularly in case of environment goods and market goods. So, it talks about certain conditions, and if those conditions are fulfilled, we get what is called as an efficient economic outcome. This Pareto optimality criterion further states that an economic outcome is said to be Pareto optimal if any reallocation of resources can't make someone better off without making someone worse off. So this particular phrase, that is, we are comparing that if we are going to redistribute these resources or if we are going to reallocate these resources, then how can this reallocation make someone at least better off without making someone worse off? So if a reallocation of resources, whether it is factor inputs, whether it is the choices of goods made by the consumer, if this reallocation helps us to make at least one person better off without making anyone worse off, we say that economic outcome is efficient. And that is what is also called as Pareto optimality. So whenever we will be talking about Pareto optimality, whatever decisions we are going to make about the allocation or redistribution or reallocation of resources, we have to see that this particular reallocation or redistribution should not be making any one person worse off in order to make someone better off. If I am able to make someone better off without making anyone worse off, this would mean that we are increasing the social welfare in that particular economy or in that society. So, let us now further understand that how does this happen. Pareto optimality conditions are in three groups. One is efficiency in exchange, which is considered with efficiency in consumption, wherein we are taking the consumption side, that is, we are taking the situation of consumers, let us say consumer A and consumer B, and then we will be understanding their utility by consumption of various goods. Then we have another efficiency, which is efficiency in production. That is, Pareto optimality requires that it is not only that we allocate goods efficiently in the consumption market or in the consumer market. It is equally important that we see that how can we allocate the factor inputs efficiently amongst the producers of those goods. And then is the efficiency in product mix, which is basically integrating the first two efficiencies. In this particular lecture, we will be focusing on the efficiency of exchange, wherein, as I've just told you, we will be taking into consideration that how we can make one consumer better off without making anyone worse off. And how do we achieve that? What are the various conditions under which this can be done? So, efficiency of exchange, I just briefly introduced you to, is it says that allocation of commodities among the consumers is such that it is not possible to increase the satisfaction of one person without reducing the satisfaction of someone else. Since we are talking about the consumption market, we are saying that, let us say that there are two consumers, A and B, and they are consuming two goods, X and Y. So, if we want to achieve efficiency in exchange, Pareto optimality efficiency in exchange, if we want to achieve, then we say that the allocation of these commodities amongst these two consumers should be such that we should not be able to increase the satisfaction of any one person without reducing the satisfaction of someone else. That is, it means that if I'm trying to achieve efficiency of exchange, it should not be that I take goods from consumer A and give it to consumer B, and in this process, if I decrease the satisfaction of consumer A and I'm increasing the satisfaction of consumer B, this would mean an inefficient exchange because I am making someone better off by making someone worse off. But if I am able to take a bundle of goods from consumer A without changing his level of satisfaction and giving it to consumer B, and that increases his level of satisfaction, we will say that this reallocation or redistribution of goods between A and B has increased the satisfaction of one without decreasing the satisfaction of another. And hence, we will say that we have achieved a Pareto optimality. And this condition, if we want to really see that whether this allocation is efficient or not, it requires that the marginal rate of utility of substitution for the two individuals are equal. That is, if there are two individuals A and B, then marginal rate of substitution for A should be equal to marginal rate of substitution for B. That is, if I am taking away some goods from A, and whatever this person A now has, his marginal rate of substitution, that is the extra substitution he is going to get or extra satisfaction he is going to get, if it becomes equal to that of B, we say that we have achieved efficiency in exchange. So this particular concept of Pareto optimality, whether we will be talking about the consumption or the production, we will always be taking the help of this Edgeworth box diagram. That's a very wonderful graphical way of explaining the allocation of resources. So let us graphically make this Edgeworth box diagram, and let us assume that there are two people, Ram and Sham, and there are two goods they are consuming. One is food and other is garbage disposal. So F is a market good, whereas garbage disposal is an environmental good, because we are talking about the waste disposal in the environment. So we put Ram on the origin, where y-axis is representing the food consumption and x is representing the garbage disposal. Then we flip this graph, that is, we see a mirror image of the same axis, and there we are going to mark Sham's goods. So when we join these lines, what we get is called as an Edgeworth box diagram. Now let us have a look at this. As we just said that there are two persons, Ram and Sham, let us first have a look at Ram's goods graph. So as we said that this is the y-axis, here we are measuring food. On the x-axis, we are measuring garbage disposal. This 0 to O to U and O to X is measuring the consumption or the choices of Ram. So OU is Ram's food and OX is Ram's garbage disposal. So this 90-degree diagram, which is a solid line, OU and OX, shows the consumption of Ram with respect to food and with respect to garbage disposal. Now, as I just told you that if we flip this diagram, this particular dotted line which we say here will be for Sham. So this becomes garbage disposal for Sham and this becomes food for Sham. So this becomes a box. It becomes like a square, wherein here we are taking Ram on the solid line O to U and O to X is garbage disposal of Ram, and the dotted lines show Sham's goods consumption. So O-U becomes garbage disposal of Sham and this becomes garbage food of Sham. So when we join these points, something like this is going to come if we magnify this. So this, as I told you, this shows you Ram and this is your Sham. So what do we see here is O-W. If, for example, Sham is choosing to kind of stay at this point Y, and for particularly for food, and this becomes for W for food. So O-W, that is this, represents Sham's food, whereas O-Y represents Sham's garbage disposal. Then further, this means that the total food in the market will be the consumption of Ram and consumption of Sham. So what do we see is that OR, which is same as O-S, is the total food in the market. And similarly, OS and O-R is the garbage disposal in the market. So this whole square we are dividing, that is, in the economy, what is the requirement of food and what is the requirement or consumption of garbage. So this box is called as an Edgeworth box, wherein we are of course assuming, because it's a 2-degree graph, we are taking two axes, X and Y. On one axis we are having what is the amount of food being consumed by both the consumers, Ram and Sham, and on the other axis we are taking what is the demand or what is the consumption of garbage disposal, including of Ram and Sham. Then what do we see? That each point in the Edgeworth box represents one possible good allocation. That is, each point, if you see on this graph, it will show that what is the amount of goods which are being demanded by either Ram or by Shyam. So that's a way of representing that what is the possible good allocation, that is how much of food and how much of garbage disposal will be allocated between these two consumers, Ram and Shyam. Now, as we have seen that what is the availability of food and garbage disposal for the two consumers, Ram and Shyam, the other concept which we have to understand is that what is the utility which these consumers are going to derive by the consumption of two goods. We have already know that there is a concept of what is called as indifference curve. What does indifference curve shows? Indifference curve shows various combinations of two goods which give equal level of satisfaction to the consumer. For example, if we see the first indifference curve M1, it is showing that there are different combinations of food and garbage disposal which are available to Ram. And irrespective whether he takes the combination A or combination B or combination C of food and garbage disposal, his utility remains same. So if a consumer is lying on the same indifference curve, the level of utility which he or she is deriving remains the same. So if Ram is on M1, irrespective whether he uses more of food and less of garbage disposal, or if he uses more of garbage disposal and less of food, his utility will remain the same. But as we move above or on the higher indifference curves, the level of utility rises. So a higher indifference curve shows a higher level of utility or higher level of satisfaction for that consumer. So when we put various indifference curves on the same graph, that is called as indifference map. So if you see M1, M2, M3, they are representing different level of utility for Ram. And because higher indifference curve shows higher level of utility, in this indifference map, Ram's utility is greatest at M3 because M3 is the highest indifference curve. So, indifference curve is showing that what is the locus of, it's basically a locus of the various baskets of goods which are available to the consumer, and they are giving the same level of satisfaction to the consumer. So this becomes the Ram's utility curves or indifference curves. So as we have Ram, similarly we have Shyam. So in the Edgeworth box, which we had derived earlier, when we impose these utility curves or indifference curves, we try to find what type of allocation we have had. So since we know that Shyam measurement of the goods and his utility is just the mirror image axis of Ram, so in the Edgeworth box, the indifference curve of Shyam will be inverted. If you see, Ram's indifference curves we saw were like this. They were convex because we are seeing them like that. But when we see Shyam, they become inverted. They are of course convex to the origin because Shyam's origin is starting from O dash. Right? So similarly, as we saw the indifference map for Ram, and we had said higher indifference curve gives a higher level of satisfaction. So in this case of Shyam, S3 is the highest indifference curve. So Shyam's utility is highest at S3. Ram's utility was highest at M3. Shyam's utility is at S3. So what we are going to do is, we are going to use the concept of Edgeworth curve and derive the equilibrium or the allocation of resources. So what now we have done is, we have now superimposed Ram's indifference curves as well as Shyam's indifference curves. Okay, so what do we see is that in this particular point A, this point A that we see, Ram has the utility of M3 because A is lying on M3. And point D, which we see here, is showing Shyam's utility of S2. That is, if we are talking about this point D, Shyam is on S2, and if we are talking about A, Ram is on M3. Then what do we see here is that within these curves, that is this particular area which I have shaded between A to D, these are all the allocations where I can bring, if Ram is at point A and he is at M3 and Shyam is at this point D, I can, if I am able to change the satisfaction of Shyam by bringing him to S3, and without changing the utility which Ram is deriving, we will say that we have increased the social welfare. So, how do we do that? As I've just told you. Now, in this case, what we see is that this S3 is getting tangent to M3 at point C. S3 was the highest utility which Shyam could derive. M3 is the highest utility which Ram could derive. And when these two indifference curves have become tangent to each other, or they are touching each other at point C, we see that here Shyam's utility is highest and Ram's utility is also highest. So, if we are moving from this point B to point C, Ram's utility increases. Why? Because from B, Ram is at M2, which is a lower level of satisfaction. So, if by reallocation of resources, I can move Ram up from M2 to M3, Ram's utility will increase because he will be going on a higher indifference curve, whereas Shyam's utility remains constant because he is still on the point which is on S3. So, Edgeworth box is basically telling us that if we are able to make Shyam, without making Shyam worse off, we are going to make Ram better off, this will increase the social welfare of the consumer or of the society. Why? Because till we were at point B, even though, see, if this point B is on S3 for Shyam, but this point B lies on M2 for Ram. So, what we try to do is that in this particular region, I am trying to see, can I make one particular consumer better off by changing his reallocation of resources, by redistributing food and garbage disposal in such a way that for Ram his utility increases. And yes, we can do that because if we are moving from point B to point C, Ram is going up from M2 to M3. And we know M3 is the higher indifference curve compared to M2. So, higher you are on a higher indifference curve means that you are having a greater level of satisfaction. So, Edgeworth box helps us to understand that if I am able to make any one person better off without making someone worse off, as we have done here, that by moving from point B to point C, we have made someone better off without making someone worse off. So, this would mean that the total utility, which let us say in this economy there are only two people, Ram and Shyam, what we have done is we have made someone consume more, get a greater utility by shifting his composition of goods from point B to point C. So, there what is happening is I am making Ram better off without making someone worse off. So, the total utility of these, or the social utility will increase. So, social welfare will increase if we follow the Pareto Optimality rule. Then, similarly, as we said, therefore, this point C, which we have just talked about, is called as exchange efficient. Why? Because we are making someone better off without making someone worse off. So exchange efficiency is being achieved at point C of this graph. And if we want to, there is another concept which we talk about, which is called as Pareto improvement. For example, as we've just seen in the previous slide, that we could move somebody from B to C without making someone worse off, and you're making someone better off. So when this allocation was not efficient, when Ram was on point B, this means that the exchange was not efficient because we have a choice to make Ram better off, but we were not making. This means that that particular allocation of good was wasteful. We had a choice to increase the social welfare, but we were not doing. So if there is a room for improvement of anyone without making someone worse off, we call it as Pareto improvement. So a Pareto improvement took place when we move from point B to C or from A to C. That is called as Pareto improvement. But what may happen is that there may be more than one Pareto improvement. As we see here, that if you could go from A to C, that is also Pareto improvement. If you are talking about this improved the efficiency for, let us say, Ram, but if we move from this point, let us say A to D, we are improving the efficiency of Shyam because Shyam is moving from S3, which is a lower indifference curve, to S5, which is a higher indifference curve. So this would mean that there is more than one way in which we can move. We could move by making one Ram better off, or we can move from A to D by making Shyam better off. So all these points where we see tangency, but if we are on point D, and if you from D, if you move to A, what we are doing is we are making probably someone, both of them worse off, because here Ram remains on the same point, but this Shyam is going on a lower indifference curve. So whereas if we are somewhere on this point D, E and C, these are those points where there is no room for improvement. Rather, there is no Pareto improvement there. And when we join these points, D, E and C, what it is called as, this particular curve, when we make, it is called as a contract curve. Okay, so when we are joining all the efficient points, let us say this was point D, this is point A, and probably there will be many more points like this. So whenever we join these points where the two indifference curves are getting tangent to each other for the two consumers, so when we join these points and we get a curve, this curve is called as a contract curve. And what does a contract curve shows? That these are all the possible points where we have complete exchange efficiency. So if the economy is on the contract curve, so irrespective we are here, anywhere, what is going to happen is that we are going to see an efficiency of exchange. So efficiency of exchange would hence means that the marginal rate of substitution for Ram for the two goods, food and garbage disposal, it should be equal to the marginal rate of substitution for Shyam for food and garbage disposal, and this should be equal to the price of goods divided by the price of food. Because what does our consumer equilibrium say? That the marginal utility that you derive from one good upon the marginal utility that you derive from another good, that the ratio of the marginal utility of two goods for one consumer should be equal to the price ratio of the prices of those goods, because this is the point of the equilibrium of the consumer. So here, because we are talking about more than one consumer, so we say that the marginal revenue of substitution for Ram should be equal to the marginal rate of substitution for Shyam, and then it should be equal to the price of goods divided by the price of garbage divided by the price of food. So that is the efficiency of exchange. Now, of course, in Pareto optimality, it is assumed that the market is perfect market. That is, there is complete knowledge to the consumers about everything. The products are homogeneous and the price is determined by the market. So there is no market power. Hence, the price of both the goods will be decided by the market. So the equation for the efficiency of exchange becomes when the marginal rate of substitution for both the consumers becomes equal to the ratio of the prices of these two goods. So it can be inferred that a consumer may be made better off by redistribution unless the MRS, that is the slope of the indifferent curve, becomes equal to the relative price of the goods. So when they become equal, we say that we have an efficiency in exchange. So let us do a quick recap of whatever we have done today. We have said that market goods give utility, and pollution or the environmental goods, or when those goods which damage environment, give disutility. So the total utility in the society will depend on both the goods, market goods and environmental goods. The challenge before us, however, is to derive the right balance, that how much of market goods should be produced and how much of environmental goods should be produced. As we have just seen, the case of market good in our example was food, and environmental good in our example was garbage disposal. So the challenge was to find that how much of the two goods, Ram and Sham, should be consuming. And not only that, we also tried to see that what redistribution can be done so that this consumption becomes efficient. And then Pareto optimality condition we used, wherein we had said that one person can be made off without making someone worse off. And that we did by getting the equation, that is, efficiency of exchange will be there when the marginal rate of substitution for both the goods compared to the prices of both the goods become the same. So that is the efficiency of exchange. In the next lecture that we will be having, we will be discussing this concept with respect to the producers. So till then, thank you very much.